Not every tyrant begins with blood. Some begin with applause. Some do not need swords at first because something even more dangerous has already been planted in the human mind. The belief that a man can become divine. And once that moment happens, collapse has already been decided, even if no one can see the ending yet. Picture a land so favored by nature it feels unbelievable. A river that never seems to run dry, carrying silt, life, and wealth. Fields stretching wide, granaries overflowing, palaces rising above the desert. This is Mizr, ancient Egypt, an empire the world of that time could not ignore. But behind that prosperity was a dark truth. Its abundance was built on the pain of the oppressed. At the center of that empire stood Pharaoh, not just a king, but the embodiment of absolute power. Every decision flowed from one mouth. Every law served one will. There was no resistance, no dialogue, only submission. And when people are forced to bow long enough, they do not only fear, they begin to believe. At first, Pharaoh was called the Supreme One as a political symbol. But slowly that title crossed the boundary of worldly authority. Temples turned toward him. Rituals were performed in his name. His name was spoken not only as king, but as the giver of life, and the most dangerous thing happened. Pharaoh himself started believing it. When a man believes he is a god, he no longer sees limits, and he no longer accepts any truth outside himself. Inside that illusion, fear kept growing. Power built on oppression is never truly secure. It always dreads the day it will be overturned. Pharaoh watched the children of Israel increase in number, the people he viewed as inferior but who were becoming more and more numerous. He did not see them as human beings, he saw them as a threat. And when fear combines with absolute power, it produces crime. A dream, an omen, a whisper from fortune tellers was enough to trigger madness. Pharaoh believed a child would appear, a child from the very people he oppressed, and that child would be the end of his rule. Instead of reflecting, Pharaoh chose the tyrant's most familiar solution: destroy the future before it can breathe. The order went out, cold and final, to kill every newborn boy among the children of Israel. The cries of infants rose in the night, families shattered. Lives that had not even opened their eyes were sentenced by the fear of a man who claimed to be divine. This was not only oppression. It was the desperate declaration of a power rotting from the inside. Pharaoh thought he was protecting his throne, but in reality he was digging deeper into the road to destruction. Hello and welcome to Prophetic History Explained. The story we are entering is not only history, it is a mirror for every age. It is a story about how power can blind the human soul, and how arrogance always creates its greatest enemy from within. Because what Pharaoh did not know or refused to know is this: when a human being dares to stand against the Creator, every strength he holds is only a temporary illusion. The murdered children were not the end of destiny. On the contrary, in that thick darkness, a thread of destiny was quietly being woven. And the greatest paradox of history was about to unfold. The one trying to kill destiny would unknowingly become the one who clears its path. If you think this is only a story about an ancient king, stay with us. Because Pharaoh's ending does not only bury one man, it leaves a chilling warning for everyone who ever believed power could replace God. If you want to follow this story all the way to its final moment, do not forget to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us. Every subscription gives us the drive to keep bringing you stories of history, faith, and truth that humanity must never forget. When tyranny reaches its peak, people often think there is no room left for hope. But the history of the prophets reveals the opposite rule. In the darkest moments, destiny is preserved in the quietest ways. The birth of Moses, peace be upon him, happened in that kind of world, with no spotlight, no celebration, only a mother's constant fear and the footsteps of men carrying orders to kill. That mother had no name in the records of power. She had no army and no political influence. But she had what Pharaoh could never possess: complete trust in Allah. Day after day, under unbearable tension, as news of murdered children spread everywhere, her heart faced the question no mother ever wants to answer. How do you save your child when the entire system of power is aimed at him? In that moment, divine guidance came, not as a cold command, but as a quiet comfort. Raise the child, and when fear rises, place him into the water. Do not fear, do not grieve, because I will return him to you. This was not a promise that human logic finds easy to accept. Placing a newborn into the Nile, into moving waters, is an act beyond every instinct of safety. But faith is not measured by certainty of outcome. It is measured by surrender when there is no other choice left. The moment that small cradle left the mother's arms was not only separation. It was a silent declaration. Pharaoh's power cannot reach what Allah has decreed. The Nile, the symbol of Egypt's prosperity and control, became the road that carried destiny. The waters moved by Allah's will, not by a tyrant's will. While Pharaoh's palace drowned in luxury and the illusion of control, a great paradox was forming. The most hunted child in Egypt drifted toward what looked like the safest place in the kingdom, not by strength, but by the wisdom of the Creator. When the cradle was found near the palace, every human calculation was overturned. High walls and strict guards proved helpless before a plan carried out in silence. Asiya, Pharaoh's wife, enters the story not as a powerful queen, but as an awakened soul inside a brutal court. She had lived long enough in the palace to understand her husband's cruelty, and she was perceptive enough to sense that power cannot fill the emptiness in a human heart. When she looked at the child in the cradle, what touched her was not politics. It was humanity. A strange calm spread through her, as if the child carried not danger but a reminder of something forgotten. Asiya's intervention was not loud and not confrontational. She did not challenge Pharaoh head-on. She stirred the last traces of humanity still buried inside him. Her words were gentle enough not to ignite his rage, yet strong enough to protect Moses' life. In that moment, Allah placed mercy in the heart of a woman living under tyranny, making her part of a plan far greater than the palace could imagine. Moses grew up in the palace not to enjoy luxury, but to be prepared. He was raised inside the very system he would one day confront, learning how tyranny works from the inside. Even when the child refused to nurse from anyone else, it was not coincidence. It was an invisible thread pulling Moses back to his biological mother. Allah did not only return the child, He returned him with honor and safety, exactly as promised. This is the deeper lesson beneath what seems like a simple story. Destiny is never abandoned, even when every door looks shut. Allah does not rush and does not show off, but His planning is precise down to every detail. Pharaoh believed he controlled life and death, yet he did not realize that inside his own palace the seed of truth was being raised, growing day by day, waiting for the appointed time. And from that quiet protection, a mission would slowly take shape. Not through violence, not through schemes, but through faith, patience, and complete trust in the one who promises and never breaks his promise. Before Moses, peace be upon him, became a messenger carrying Allah's command, he was first a human being. And that human stage, with its clashes, regrets, and mistakes, shaped him into someone strong enough to carry a mission far beyond what any one person could bear. Moses grew up between two opposing worlds. One was the palace of power, where law served the strong. The other was the harsh reality of the oppressed, lives crushed with no one listening. Moses' heart never truly belonged to the palace. He saw injustice, felt it, and could not ignore it. And that sensitivity, that refusal to accept evil as normal, pushed him into the first great turning point of his life. One day, Moses saw an oppressed man crying out for help in danger. Without calculating advantage, without weighing consequences, Moses acted on the instinct to protect. A single blow meant to stop violence led to an ending no one wanted. A life was lost, not out of hatred, not from a plan to kill, but from strength mixed with a moment of lost control. That moment drew a line in Moses' life. He did not run in arrogance, and he did not justify himself by saying he had a good reason. Instead, he immediately understood the seriousness of what happened. It was not only the death of one man. It was a warning about his own limits. Moses turned to Allah, admitted his wrong, asked forgiveness, and carried sincere remorse in his heart. Here, the difference between a tyrant and the chosen becomes clear. Pharaoh denies wrongdoing, blames others, and crushes truth with violence. Moses does the opposite. He bows to truth even when that truth hurts. Allah forgave Moses not because he was faultless, but because he knew how to return when he was wrong. But forgiveness did not erase the test. News of the death spread quickly, and Moses became a target of the forces he once lived among. This time, the danger did not come from a sudden emotional moment, but from a system ready to crush anyone who threatened its order. When a secret warning reached Moses that his life was being hunted, he understood it was time to leave. Moses' departure from Egypt was not cowardly escape. It was a necessary step back. Sometimes Allah does not push the chosen straight into their mission. He leads them through loneliness, exile, and uncertainty to wash away what remains of the ego. Moses left with no power, no wealth, no guarantee, except trust that Allah was guiding every step. On that road of exile, Moses learned what the palace could never teach: humility. He tasted weakness, hunger, and dependence, and in that state that looked like the lowest point, his soul expanded. He learned that real strength does not live in muscles or status, but in complete surrender to the one who decides all outcomes. This stage had no spectacular miracles, no sea splitting open, no crowds watching. It was only one man facing himself and facing Allah. Moses matured in silence, in private prayers, in long patience. This quiet preparation was necessary because a man who has not learned his own limits cannot stand before someone who calls himself divine. When Moses finished this human stage, he was no longer a hot-blooded young man acting on impulse. He became someone who feared Allah more than worldly power, who admitted fault rather than hiding it, who waited rather than rushing. Only then did Allah place on his shoulders the greatest responsibility: return to the place he once left, not as a fugitive but as the messenger of truth. Because missions are not given to those who never stumble, but to those who stumble, rise, and keep walking with a heart that has been refined. The confrontation between Moses, peace be upon him, and Pharaoh did not begin with swords. It began with words. Truth stepped into the heart of false power, uninvited and unafraid. Moses did not come as a rebel, and he did not carry political ambition. He came as a messenger with a message simple enough to terrify every tyrant: bow to the Lord of all worlds. Pharaoh did not listen with his ears. He listened with arrogance. He did not respond to the message. He attacked the man delivering it. He brought up the past, brought up upbringing, brought up favors as if truth could be crushed by a debt of gratitude. For Pharaoh, everything was a tool to preserve his position. But Moses did not argue on that ground. He did not deny the past, and he did not bow because of it. He separated human kindness from Allah's ultimate authority. When words could not pierce the wall of arrogance, Allah allowed signs to appear: a staff transformed, a hand shone with light, not to show off but to draw the line between truth and illusion. Pharaoh saw real danger for the first time, yet instead of reflecting, he chose the familiar path. turn truth into spectacle so his power stays at the center. He summoned magicians, masters of illusion, believing that what can fool the crowd can also fool history. A public showdown was arranged not to seek truth but to humiliate Moses before the people. Pharaoh believed that if the crowd turned away, truth would collapse. But he forgot something. The ones who know illusions best are the ones most able to recognize the difference between magic and a miracle. When ropes and staffs moved before the people's eyes, tension filled the wide open space. Even Moses in the first moment felt the natural unease of a human being. But that unease did not last. The command came, and when Moses cast down his staff, the illusions dissolved. Not through cleverness, but through overwhelming reality. What had amazed the crowd was swallowed up, leaving a heavy silence. In that silence, what no one expected happened. The magicians, the men who made their living by deceiving human sight, were the first to fall down in prostration. They did not need debate and did not need persuasion. They recognized instantly that what they witnessed was beyond human skill. Their faith did not rise from fear, but from clear recognition. And when they declared belief, they also accepted the cost. Pharaoh's rage exploded like never before. Because in that moment he did not only lose a contest, he lost the divine image he had spent years building. His power was exposed for what it was. It lived on fear, not on truth. Threats of torture and execution poured out as a desperate attempt to regain control. But in the face of death, those who had just found truth did not tremble. Their calm became the strongest indictment of Pharaoh. After that public defeat, Pharaoh did not change. A hardened heart does not soften by signs. Signs only feed its stubbornness. Disasters began to strike, not as random anger, but as repeated warnings. Each time a plague was lifted, a promise was made, and each time the promise was betrayed. The cycle repeated, revealing a bitter truth. Not everyone who sees a sign is willing to change. Through those years, Moses kept calling with a patience only the fully trusting can carry. He did not despair when rejected, and he did not shake when mocked. Because Moses understood a messenger's task is not to force results, but to deliver truth completely. This confrontation was not only between two men. It was between two views of reality. One believes power can manufacture truth. The other insists truth exists independent of power. And in that conflict, history slowly leaned toward the side with no army and no throne, only steadfastness before truth. There are moments in history when every road closes, when people are forced to face the final question: what have we placed our trust in? For Moses, peace be upon him, and those who believed with him, that moment came on the night they left Egypt. No farewell ceremony, no packed supplies, only hurried footsteps of people who had endured too much. They left not because they had already seen victory, but because they believed truth cannot keep living beside tyranny. When dawn appeared, fear surged. Ahead was a vast sea. Behind them, Pharaoh's powerful army was drawing near. Human reason saw a dead end, but faith sensed a command not yet revealed. In that moment, Moses did not call for battle, and he did not comfort them with vague promises. He stood firm in the certainty that the one who led them out of darkness would not abandon them at the edge of despair. When the command came, the staff touched the water, and the sea split as if it had never known boundaries. The path that appeared was not a miracle for entertainment. It was an escape route for those willing to walk. The children of Israel crossed with fear mixed with hope, each step testifying that faith does not demand full understanding before obedience. Pharaoh saw this and still did not stop. Arrogance had erased every warning. He believed that if Moses could do it, then his power could do it too. In that moment, tyranny confused authority with ability. When the army charged into the open path, the sea closed. No debate, no second chance. The power that made a kingdom tremble vanished under cold water. Only when his final breath was fading did Pharaoh speak the admission he had denied all his life. But faith born from panic at death cannot erase a lifetime of stubborn refusal. Truth is not bought by a moment, and justice is not delayed by last-second regret. That is the severe but fair rule. Opportunity remains as long as the heart is willing to open before punishment is seen. Pharaoh's death did not end the story. It became a sign for later generations. His body was preserved as a warning without words. A man who once claimed to be divine, who believed power could cross every limit, now lies motionless as proof that no throne stands against Allah's justice. That preservation was not honor. It was a warning. What people build with arrogance becomes a lesson for those who come after. The children of Israel were saved, but their journey was not finished. Freedom from slavery does not automatically mean freedom from tests of faith. Being rescued is not the destination. It is the beginning of responsibility. Allah granted them safety, promise, and direction, but also placed new tests before them. Will they remember or forget, be grateful or doubt? The legacy of this story is not in the miracle itself, but in the clear separation between two paths. One path believes power can define truth. The other path insists truth exists independent of power. Pharaoh embodied the first path, and his end became an eternal warning. Moses and those who believed with him embodied the second path, where patience and trust open a way out even when no option seems left. Across every era, this story still echoes. Every society, every person has their own Red Sea moments, moments that feel impossible, and each person must choose, walk forward in faith or rush forward in arrogance. Pharaoh's end shows that strength without humility is only a fragile illusion. But trust in Allah, even if it begins with trembling steps, can open a path no one could see in advance. That is the final lesson, not only for a lost empire, but for all humanity. Power can silence people, but only truth remains when all the noise is gone. The greatest lesson from this story is that Allah does not need us to be strong. He needs us to be sincere. Salvation does not come only after everything collapses. It comes to those who return before it is too late. Faith is not something spoken only in desperation. It is a choice repeated every day, even when results are not yet visible. In modern life, each of us can carry a piece of Pharaoh or a piece of Moses without realizing it. When we misuse power, even small power, to dominate, belittle, or crush others, we are taking the first steps down the road of arrogance. But when we admit our mistakes, defend truth even at a cost, and leave outcomes to Allah, we are living in the spirit of Moses. Applying this lesson does not require dramatic actions. It starts with everyday choices. Honesty instead of deceit, humility instead of ego, trust in Allah instead of trusting only human power and calculation. If you felt the depth of this story and want to keep exploring lessons of faith, the history of the prophets, and messages that still matter for society today, join the Prophetic History Explained community. There we learn, reflect, and connect with stories not only to hear them, but to change how we live and how we see the world. And do not forget to subscribe to Prophetic History Explained to support us, so we can keep bringing you deeper, honest, meaningful content in the videos ahead. Your support is how these stories of truth are not allowed to be forgotten.